Hello, welcome to The Conversation in News Central Television. This program where we bring you up to speed with all the political happenings on the African continent. I am Gbenga Aborowa.
And I am Rita, Omodia. Today on The Conversation, the Democratic Alliance has filed papers in the North Gauteng High Court seeking a declaratory order for South African government to arrest Russian President Vladimir Putin if he arrives the country for the Brics Summit in August.
And also today on The Conversation, following the ongoing rivalry between the two important agencies in Nigeria, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, and the Department of State Services, DSS, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has ordered the DSS to vacate the office of the EFCC in Lagos with immediate effect. Interesting development there. We always talk about interagency rivalry, and it's good that the president did let this drag on for too long and has stepped in to intervene.
Definitely, as soon as he's inaugurated, he already has plenty of things to do, and we're seeing two special forces. I really want to know what exactly you're called, because it said that the two of them had cohabited in that facility.
Oh, yes.
So why is DSS now claiming ownership of it, and at the same time also denying barricading the EFCC officials from entering the office?
It really didn't have to get to that level.
Yeah, it didn't. It didn't. Yeah. Meanwhile, in South Africa, we're discussing that it's quite a brilliant move from them, taking immunity.
South African government.
I must say.
But there's pushback from the DA, and they said they're going to take the government to court and resist that. But I think it will still have to be passed by Parliament before they can change that law. So much controversy just because of one visitor. And I like what the Deputy Minister said. He said, back then, when the Chilean government wanted Augusto Pinochet to answer for crimes against humanity, the British government said it was too frail to attend trial, and they didn't grant the Chilean government its extradition treaty. And he also spoke of the double standards and hypocrisy of the West and the ICC. So I look forward to our discussion on that. But other things are happening in Nigeria. As somebody said, the president hit the ground running. The president hit the ground, and Nigerians are running helter-skelter for petrol. But I'm sure we're very resilient people.
Definitely.
Would overcome.
There was one thing I saw that he said there was an inauguration and the inauguration after party where people are queuing in for fuel. That was quite sarcastic. But at the same time, it shows that there's a lot of work for the new president at hand. But anyways, let's begin conversations.
Okay, we begin the show in South Africa as the country is planning to change its law to decide whether to arrest a leader wanted by the International Criminal Court, and that is the person of Russian President Vladimir Putin. This development is linked to speculation about whether South Africa will stand by its invitation to Russian President Vladimir Putin to visit in August, as the ICC had issued an arrest warrant for him over the Ukraine war. The law would grant South Africa the power to exempt certain individuals from arrest. South Africa has invited Putin to a summit of BRICS leaders, but it's unclear if he will attend.
The country has also granted diplomatic immunity to Russian officials attending the summit. The main opposition party, Democratic Alliance DA, has taken legal action to compel authorities to arrest Putin if he visits. South Africa is also pursuing a waiver from the ICC based on Article 98 of the Rome Statute, which establishes the court. The Deputy Minister criticized the ICC for perceived double standards and cited past examples of international justice exemptions. Now, joining us for this conversation, we have Reitumetse Benedict Phiri. He is from the IusPrudentia Specialist Counsel. He joins us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you so much, Benedict, for joining us on the conversation. All right, Benedict, I don't know if you could hear me. Could you kindly unmute your device, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, wonderful, I can. All right, so to begin conversations, how do you assess the potential implications of South Africa's proposed law change regarding the arrest of leaders wanted by the International Criminal Court? And how do you think this might impact South Africa's international relationships and its standing with the ICC?
It's certainly a complicated matter, and it's not a straightforward matter. As it currently stands, South Africa is bound, or the government is bound by the International Criminal Court Act, which was made into law to give effect to the Rome Statute in South Africa. The Supreme Court of Appeal, which is the second highest court in South Africa, has had the ability to pronounce on South Africa's obligations under that piece of legislation when Omar al-Bashir came to South Africa for the AU summit, I think at the time it was, but South Africa failed to arrest him and hand him over to the International Criminal Court. So it's clear what South Africa's obligations are should Vladimir Putin come to the Brics Summit, and obviously should the warrant be, or the request by the ICC be made that he be arrested. It is prudent, I suppose, from a government's perspective, to seek to deal with the law, but I think that is actually not necessarily the best thing to do in the circumstances, because South Africa does have international obligations to deal with, and political expediency is not a reason to get out of legal obligations by the government. Obviously, it is in their purview to amend the law from a political perspective to suit the government at that point in time. But certainly, I think it's thumbing the nose at South Africa's international legal obligations, and I don't think that will be well received in the broader international legal community.
Broader international legal community, you say, but South Africa has relationships with different blocs and different countries around the world. Now, you started by saying it's a very complex situation. Now, given the speculations surrounding Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to South Africa in August, what are the potential diplomatic consequences if he attends or decides not to attend the Brics Summit? How could it affect the dynamics amongst the Brics nations?
I think, from amongst the Brics nations, it will certainly be a show of solidarity. I think the biggest issue for South Africa is trading partners such as the EU and the US. For instance, AGOA, the US is the largest trading partner for South Africa, and certainly the benefits that South Africa experiences under the AGOA framework may disappear, and that will have wide-scale ramifications from an economic perspective and obviously a political perspective. So I think it is a tightrope for the government to walk, because they have nailed their colors onto the Brics mast, but at the same time they require their relationships with the EU and the US in particular, in this particular instance, to be strong for the purposes of economic benefits to the country.
Sorry to interrupt you, Benedict. I want to go back to that statement you made on AGOA. So America is dangling the stick that, if South Africa goes on to have very good relationships with Russia, it might just pull the carpet on the AGOA. Is South Africa not an independent country? Do they not have a right to decide who they want to be friends with? Because I don't remember South Africa going to the United States and saying, you know what, I don't want you to be friends with this country or not. Don't they have the right to decide who they want to be friends with?
They certainly have the right to decide who they want to be friends with, and they certainly have the right to decide how they lead from an international relations policy perspective. I think what complicates Mr. Putin's visit in this particular instance is that there are allegations of a shipment of arms that were shipped to Russia and loaded in South Africa in a situation which could potentially attract sanctions and punitive sort of repercussions through the various other instruments from a country like the United States. So I think if it was just the Brics Summit in and of its own, I think certainly the course of action that the country is looking to take around the waiver and certainly sort of clarify what its legal obligations would be insofar as arresting Mr. Putin would be concerned, I think that's an easier sort of conversation, given what countries do around such matters for whatever reasons they may have from an international political perspective. I think what is complicating the issue is that there is this backdrop of alleged arms that were shipped to Russia from South Africa, which may have the effect of triggering quite a serious response from people like the US and potentially sanctions, right? So I think that's what makes this even more complicated, just so that it's not just a simple question of South Africa being a sovereign state and just choosing who its friends may be. I think there are international obligations that it is obliged to comply with. It is South African law that the Rome Statute has to be given effect to, and that would be a big issue for the South African government if the Rome Statute wasn't given effect to while Mr. Putin was in South Africa. Hence, the need to potentially amend the law to give itself some breathing room in that regard.
All right, now all this amendment is due to the fact that, the Brics Summit is right around the corner and the Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected to attend. Now, looking holistically at the Brics Summit, which consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, how successful has it been in its economic gains for these member countries?
There's certainly been impetus, from all these 5 countries in giving effect to BRICS. And I think the summit is an important step in ensuring, better collegiality and closeness between each of these countries. So certainly if a sitting president like Mr. Putin would not be able to honor the invitation or be, forced to be arrested while he's in South Africa, I think that certainly puts a spanner in the works of the BRICS project overall. So I think it is important as a regional organization, or rather an organization between these countries, cross-regional organization, for South Africa to be participating alongside which, bigger countries effectively in this particular instance. South Africa is an important player in the region. And certainly it's important that it be seen to be playing ball within this BRICS setup.
But what if he attends virtually? I mean, because we're seeing immunity also granted to Russian officials. Is a virtual attendance not another option for South Africa rather than changing of these laws and immunity granted on the Russian officials?
One would certainly think that would be the least destructive process, because if Mr. Putin arrives in South Africa, it puts the government on a collision course, because the government has previously ignored a court order with respect to the arrest of Mr. al-Bashir, and that created a big issue for questions around the rule of law and the fact that the court's decisions should actually be given effect to. So I think the government, if it keeps its head in the sand in this particular way and doesn't deal with the matter, for instance, by less destructive means such as, Mr. Putin coming to the summit via electronic means, for instance, I think it raises a question for the South African government about its commitment to the rule of law and its commitment that it will actually give effect to the laws that are also binding on it. So it's not a great situation that's brewing, because potentially, especially in light of the DA's application that you've mentioned, the government could be on a collision course with government around the enforceabilities of the court's orders when government is on the receiving end of those court orders.
Thank you, Mr. Phiri. It's not just a complicated issue diplomatically, also speaking domestically in South Africa. I remember asking Dr. Naledi Pandor, South Africa's foreign minister, about this issue, and she said, South Africa is neutral on this issue. And also, I had a chat with Alan Winde, the Premier of Western Cape, and he told me categorically that, if Putin steps his foot in the Western Cape province, he will make sure is arrested. Now, my question to you, Mr. Phiri, is this: what are the potential political motivations behind South Africa's desire to grant itself exemptions in deciding whom to arrest and who not to arrest under this new proposed law? How does this align with South Africa's commitment to the International Criminal Court and its role in promoting international justice?
And I think it's great that you raise Minister Pandor, because she's come out and spoken out of the hypocrisy from Western nations insofar as the International Criminal Court is concerned, and whether certain presidents can be arrested, for instance, for violations of gross human rights violations. So I think, it's an important political statement that the country is making and standing up for itself and its sovereignty to say, we will also take onto account our commitment and our participation in the International Criminal Court and the broader sort of international legal community based on our own assessment of what may be good for us. Certainly, the alignment or the lines of alignment are being redrawn. There is a shifting global geopolitical world order. And I think from South Africa's perspective, in as much as they're saying they're non-aligned to Russia on the question of the Ukraine war, I think it's very clear that the side that is being favored in this particular instance is to give Russia the recognition and the respect and to build on that relationship. And certainly that's what will be confirmed if Mr. Putin is allowed to sort of come into South Africa and not be arrested, notwithstanding that there's a warrant for his arrest in this particular instance.
Okay, now, Benedict, we're going to go back to the issue of the ICC and this arrest warrant for Putin. And the question is, what exactly are the potential diplomatic ramifications for the ICC issuing an arrest warrant on Vladimir Putin? What exactly are the charges against Vladimir Putin?
Sorry, if you could just, I missed, the line just went bad there. I'm so sorry.
Okay, we're looking at the main charges against Vladimir Putin for the ICC calling for his arrest warrant. What exactly are the main charges against him?
So the charges relate obviously to the conduct of Russian forces in Ukraine. And these are essentially war crimes that are being considered in this particular respect. So I haven't seen the warrant, so I can't speak to exactly what the charges are under the particular warrant. But my understanding, based on the reporting to date, is that that's what they relate to.
Okay, now considering South Africa's refusal to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its stated goal of remaining neutral, how might this stance affect its diplomatic relationships with other countries? I remember the United States ambassador to the United Nations, she did say that, this is a clearly black and white issue, and countries that are neutral kind of means implicit support for Russia, trying to say that, you really don't have the agency to decide or stay neutral in this situation. Now, are there any potential consequences for South Africa's role as a mediator or peacemaker in regional conflicts beyond the threat of, pulling South Africa out of AGOA? Or what other consequences might you see here? Because the United States, I believe, is South Africa's biggest trade partner.
Yeah, it's very interesting because public statements are often not matched by what happens when the parties meet. So even the ambassador to the US for the US in South Africa, Mr. Brics, when he first brought to the attention that there were some armaments that could have shipped to Russia, the government sort of wrapped him around the knuckles, and he somewhat retracted on that particular statement and mentioned that he shouldn't have actually approached the disclosure of that matter in that manner, as it didn't give effect to the cordial relationship between the parties. So in as much as we may see public statements which may suggest that a strong line may be held against South Africa in this respect, I think ultimately it comes to how the parties actually talk about it, when there's no media and all of that. And we've certainly seen from America's initial response to the armaments, which was a strong response, that they've backtracked quite substantially to give some respect to the South African government and the manner in which they'd like to handle this particular matter. So I think, it's not a certain, if this is given effect to South Africa, will be visited recriminations instantly. I think it would be a gradual process that would involve some discussions between the parties over time, and hopefully in this particular instance, South Africa would be able to still meet and find its international partners, including the US, but I don't think it would be an immediate knee-jerk reaction that South Africa would immediately lose these benefits. I think there may be time for South Africa to explain its position within the international context and hopefully keep, some of the trade that it has with the US and the EU, which is their two largest trading partners. And I think that trade is important for both countries. It's not only one way. It's important for both the US and also South Africa as well.
Okay, looking at South Africa's standpoint, on one side it claims to be non-aligned, on the other side it seems like a peacemaker. And then earlier on last year, we talked about South Africa trying to withdraw from the ICC. Now, from a diplomatic standpoint, what are the implications of South Africa's decision to write to the ICC about a waiver under Article 98 of the Rome Statutes? How do you think this might impact the relationship between South Africa and the ICC? And are there any potential consequences for this?
I think it's certainly entitled to request that waiver under the ICC. And I think that's the correct way to do it, because I think if the waiver is granted, then certainly it's defensible what South Africa does in respect of Mr. Putin, and it doesn't matter which country has an issue with that. I think the bigger diplomatic ramification is if the waiver is not obtained, and it looks like South Africa then is a reluctant participant of the ICC. I think there will be question marks asked around whether it still belongs as a party to the Rome Statute and whether it still gives effect to multilateralism on that basis. But certainly, I think if the waiver is obtained, the diplomatic fallout can certainly be limited, if not curtailed, because what South Africa would have been doing or how it will act will be informed by a formal piece of paper from the ICC.
Now, finally, Reitumetse, as we wrap up the conversation, what's the mood on the ground in South Africa? Ordinary South Africans concerned about this? Because if you look at the political setup, the EFF, I would like to say for once, aligned with the African National Congress. Julius Malema even offered to drive President Putin everywhere and also offer some sort of personal protection. And now the Democratic Alliance has gone to court to challenge this. So what's the mood like amongst ordinary South Africans, and does this have political implications?
I think the way you've just described it, you've got on one side people like the EFF and the ANC who are really standing firm between the country's sovereignty and how they wish to deal with Mr. Putin. And on the other hand, you have people like the DA who's saying this is a threat to the rule of law. And, if the government continues to act in a way which seems to disregard its legal obligations, then the country is effectively on a slide insofar as its democracy is concerned. So I think the mood on the ground is fractured. I think others are pushing for South Africa to really rethink its participation in the ICC. And I think in the debate around the changing of the law, when it does come, I think we'll pick up a lot on what the motivations for that may be from a political perspective and where South Africa seeks to see itself with partners like Russia eventually. But certainly the mood is quite fractured at the moment. I think this is a potential threat to the rule of law if not handled properly. And I think the government has to really consider its position really, really carefully to ensure that it's still, seen to be giving effect to the rule of law and credible in that respect.
Thank you so much, Reitumetse Benedict Phiri, MD, IusPrudentia, Specialist Counsel, join us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. We do appreciate your insights and candor on the subject. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.